See now?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Lyng. I am an architect. So my office, I founded OWMF in 2013. I'm also an educator. So usually I teach at the NUS, and I'm still teaching there now. And before, so this is in 2013 when I founded my office. Then the question is, because we are getting projects, but how do we decide how we want to design, right? So a key part of my practice is based on thinking and research, and this research and thinking framework kind of shape the direction that the design is going in my office, and it's also how I began to teach in school as a form of pedagogy. So the question really started once you so before that, I was working for other people's office, executing projects. And then when I get my own projects, I have to decide how I want to go about doing all these projects, and whether all these projects in the end will come together as a form of thesis or questioning or definition of what I think is the architecture that I want to do. So it went back. So I started listing down. This is a practice that is actually encouraged by my professor in school. I started listing down the 10 buildings in history. So architecture, as you know, is about 2,000 to 5,000 years old. And I started thinking about what are the 10 buildings that I think is important to the development of architecture, in my opinion. And I came up with this list. This is edited in 2020, but the original list was done in 2013. So as I consolidated my thoughts, it brought me back to the projects that I did in school. So the first one is this paper structure that I did, and the whole idea is that I was interested in architecture that is not so heavy. It's kind of changing. So this is actually a very heavy slab of bridge. It's a bridge on top, this black thing. So the bridge is very heavy, but I designed like a very lightweight paper structure. So paper, as you know, is very lightweight and holding up something very heavy. So this is the first kind of reaction against um, the a statement, right, to what is the convention in architecture that I want to make. And then there's also this project that we analyzed the Young Museum by Herzog and de Meuron in San Francisco. So I was looking at the museum in dynamic forces. I was interested in the dynamism in architecture rather than something that is very static and heavy. So that was a compression force that I tried to draw of the museum. And this is about the tension forces that are found in the museum itself. And this is the shear forces which then determine the shape of the tower of the De Young Museum. So these are some models. As you can see, I started using some dynamic materials to make model, not just rigid materials that cannot be morphed or deformed. There's also this small class that I took. We studied dynamic systems. So this is actually studying and simulating river erosion and sedimentation in Mississippi Delta. And we were trying to grow land. But basically, this study, again, is something that's dynamic, not a rigid, static structure. Finally, in my thesis year, so that's the last year of my education, but I think it's also the first year of my career where I start to design or define what I'm interested in architecture. So my thesis was about nomads. Instead of studying civilizations and static cities, I actually was trying to study the space of nomads and how they wander and actually found orientation, not in the way we have roads or axes or boulevard, but it was based on stars. So here on the top, bottom left-hand corner, you see all the stars charts, right? And how they basically reference their spatial references based on something uh, outside. And they don't have roads, but maybe they know their destination. They know where to find water and grass for their herds, right? So it's a very different spatial concept than a city, a sedentary city that we are used to. And then the thesis went on to study some migrants population. So it's like modern day nomads in the city, and how they start to occupy less static neighborhoods, sometimes in leftover spaces in the city. So it's sort of like pop-up spaces wherever they want to inhabit and occupy. So I was interested in those cities, those places in the city itself. So these are some of the dynamic structures that we study. So looking back, and then we go back to the list. So the first step in the career was to basically again define what this list is, and that kind of everyone's list is different, but basically it defines what you think good architecture is, and hopefully through your projects you try to get there. This turned into a project where I started to ask all my friends or people that I meet who are related in the related field. So they have their own list. And then I thought it would be a good reference for everyone, to kind of from their list of 10, you basically can have an idea of how this architect define architecture and how their projects strive to go. And this is a method or a thinking that's from my professor, Herbius Woods. So as you define all these projects, you basically will look at, when you have look at an architecture project, he said there's only two types of project. One that opens up new possibilities, and then the second one is basically trying to refine and make a grand finale of an existing idea. So it's about perfection, but the first one is about opening up new possibilities. So it's like iPhone being the first smartphone, right? Then before that, it's not structurally changing. It's just a phone with buttons. So iPhone is kind of like a critical project that really redefined the whole field. So I was interested in this kind of projects and aspire to do projects like this rather than projects of grand finale, which is refinement. So another kind of influence is Peter Eisenman. And of course, he also wrote many books about his list of 10 buildings that kind of influence him. So this kind of thinking is very important because it's going to determine how I design and how I teach. So to putting together all the thoughts, I basically did this whole scrolls, and this is based on looking at all the past critical projects through architecture languages. And architecture languages, there are four. These are the four that eventually kind of consolidated. The first one is primitive, the second one is Cartesian, the third one is parametric, and the last one is topological. So I'm going to talk about what these four languages are and how they structure my projects and my teaching in school. And then after this, I will go into one of the project in detail. It will be from how we, from conception to all the way to how we build the building. So just to explain a bit more, so the four languages, what are languages? Languages are basically how geometry-based and form-based, and form and spaces are related. And so it's like an author writing an essay. So text may be their default output, but or for musicians, they have musical notes and notation, right? That's how they draw, and that's the output. So for architects, the formal language is related to how we make form, how we arrange all this geometry in relation to one another, and how we compose them. So the building is like an essay, and then we have different geometry and different ways of making all this geometry. So again, like syntax, so this applies, this borrowing from text-based creation. So syntax in architecture means the way we make form. There are rules, geometrical rules that we then follow to make this building work. So going into the first language, so this is primitives. Basically is for the first 2,000 years of Western history. So it's about basically the idea of solid and void, very heavy architecture, and architecture that deals with very basic geometrical shape. So these are some of the slides, images that I took from my lecture, and also what I wrote for my students, basically. So we are looking at architecture that's like that, that's symmetrical. They are quite basic, like circle, you can read squares, you can read triangle. They are usually extruded, right? And volumetrically, you have spheres, cylinders, pyramids, and cube, right? So these are called platonic solids. Yeah, so this the first one that I decided that I think in school I was reacting kind of against this because this language has been done, and therefore I don't want to do it or repeat it, right? So in school, then this is taught to the year one students usually, and it's the first step to help them to create. So we have this basic geometry, and these are some of the works that they have done. They learn about how to compose basic geometry. They make models that is based on void and solid, right? Very kind of volumetric works. They learn how to deal with casting material and carving material, again showing the masses and volumetric materials. They learn eventually how to create their own architecture based on that language. So this is a creation. Previously, that was kind of like they are studying the old classical projects. So this is something that one of the students made. So it's based on these three platonic volumes, and they are rotated in space. So the result is some interesting space that is made from the same ingredient but composed differently. So this is another student's work where you start to, it's just using different proportions of rectangles and cubes that is excavated out of a solid cube. Okay. The second one is Cartesian. Cartesian basically is XYZ and points, lines, planes. So the ingredients now becomes a column, a plane. They are no longer so volumetric. They are kind of planar. They are stacked to form three-dimensional form. So they are plane-based. They can be asymmetrical but balanced. So this is also taught usually to the first-year student, and this is kind of how HDB and a lot of the buildings are still building currently, right? So every floor is different. It's held up by a grid of columns, and you have walls which are like the plain materials. So this is another project done by the year one. So they are studying building by Corbusier. They are studying some of the curve and planar or flat or straight kind of elements, wall elements, and what are the rules to then place all these elements in the grids. So these are some of the drawings produced. So in this, this is another project by studying Mies, another great master. And this is John Haydock's work. So this whole era is about points, lines, planes that I think we are quite familiar with. We still build with them because this is the language of concrete and steel, and that's still pretty much the materials that we have today. So this is the first house that I built when I started my office. So I was thinking about these two languages and how can I make volumes, combine volumes from the first language with all the Cartesian expression of the second language and make a house. So this is a semi-detached house. As you can see, there are three volumes, and these three volumes are basically the private spaces. And the other spaces here will be the living and the dining and the roof terrace. So this will be expressed in a skeletal frame-like kind of language. So you have this, the combination of these two, and they are kind of staggered, so that the air and sun can flow. This is a model of the house. In fact, there are two versions because the client was trying to decide how big he wants his house to be, right? So you can see, so the white pure volumes they're all private spaces. This is the master bedroom, the guest, and the son's bedroom. Then the rest of the spaces, they are free to, it's open. Okay. So this is the final built products from the outside. And this is the inside. So where you have the staggered floor levels, the whole house is connected kind of vertically. So this is quite a simple semi-detached house. And then this is another project. So the second project kind of wants to continue this idea in a different way. So again, the private spaces are expressed as volumes and enclosed volumes. And then there's another envelope enclosing. So the rest of the spaces are all the living spaces, exercise spaces for this bungalow house. It's under construction now. It will be probably completed next year. So this is a bit more complex than what we have just now. And what is holding up all these volumes would be the Cartesian structure. So these are fins in two directions, and they are expressed by using a different material. So as usual, then I like to make models because they are the most real thing before you actually make the real building. So we have inside the structure, and then this is the envelope. So the envelope kind of goes from one end to the opposite end. It cuts across in a XYZ direction. These are some of the photos of the model, and we're trying to study basically the light, or to try to help client envision what kind of the spaces inside. This is a drawing. Now the colors change a bit, but basically an initial drawing to show how this building looks like. Okay, and now we move to the third language, which is about parametric form. So here we have basically a complex kind of geometry. So it's like what Mario Capo said in his talk, right? He calls this a potato because potato is difficult to describe geometrically. It's not really a cylinder, it's not really a sphere, but in order to describe this complex geometry, you need some skills. Like one of the skills is, this is done by also a year one studio in NUS. So to describe the potato, basically you have to cut the potato into a lot of slices at maybe equal interval. And if you trace the section of the shape of all these slices and you connect them together, that's how you can get the complex shape. So some of these skills we can do it now because it's enabled by computer software, so we can do this very fast now. But basically this whole era is about complex structure and form that is not so straight, can be a complex curve, can be like a sponge or a mesh that is deformed, right? So we had classical, modernist, Cartesian structure, and then now we have this kind of parametric form. In school, there are many ways or methods. Every year, we kind of do different ways and methods to generate this complex form. So one way is by material. So this is inspired by Gaudi and Frei Otto. You use bubble, you use non-rigid, malleable material like wax, like plaster. So they have forms like that, and then they will learn how to then describe this complex form by cutting a lot of sections. This is another method. It was done by they are mapping their body, dancing or shopping in space, and basically the goal is to just get a complex form, which then they learn how to build it and describe it precisely geometrically. So this is a lot of sections. You can build from wires or different planes, or you can learn how to do a kind of cladding that then forms the walls of all this structure. They can use mass material. They try to draw. So you can see this is the initial stage where it's still not precise. This is like, it's roughly something like that, and this is the light I'm going to get. So they learn how to do that, and eventually it became more specific, and they are able to describe and build this form very precisely, right? So this is almost like how we build this kind of form in real life. So a lot of my projects, a lot of my students' projects, they will fall in this category where the form is not so straightforward. We deal a lot of complex geometry because basically the first two languages, Cartesian and primitives, they have been done for 2,000 years. So now, there's still a lot to explore in this category. So another example of the projects is a building responding to sound. So again, how do we describe all this form specifically? So this is a lot of my studio's work. So this is a building that I completed. It started with when I was working for Arc Studio, and then I'm still working on this project right now because now we are doing the second kind of upgrading work. And then the first one was done 3 years after I left. So I'm going to talk about this building in detail at the end. I just want to go through the 4 languages first before we come back. But we'll come back to this building. So as you can see, it's very complex. The way we built this building is not that different from how the students build their models in school. Okay, so you saw the triangular cladding just now. We'll come back to this building. So another one during that time I was working on is an office for a water infrastructure investor. So they invest in water irrigation system and things like that. And for their office, they wanted, so I was thinking maybe we use the copper pipes that's like our plumbing pipes, right? And then I saw this image on their website where a lot of the water infrastructure is made of little cells of similar sizes. For example, the filtration system. So this is kind of inspired by that, and I wanted to make wave and complex form out of these copper tubes, but they should be quite controlled, not totally different. So this is made from 2 modules, right? And they stack together. So if you see, they form partitions and a kind of identity for this corporate project. So if you see close up, the pipes are straight, but because you join it this way, we start to have a water wave, right? So it can be quite fun. Yeah. Okay. So the 4th language is topological, and this is like this is still very new. I'm still figuring out how to build these things. And basically, what is topology? This is so just now is about one complex form, but this is about how a family of complex form. So we had one potato and trying to describe one potato. Now we have all these different potato. They look different in terms of shapes and sizes, but they share underlying same how to say properties, right? So for example, or easier to imagine is like a forest of trees. Every tree they look different. They can be taller, shorter, more leaves, less leaves, but basically they share the same algorithm that determines the bifurcation of their branches, the density or the shapes of their leaves, right? So then what is measurable, like length, area and volume, those are not very important, but basically uh, they are the same trees, the same species, because they share the same way of growth. So that is what where we are now in terms of the computer technology that allows us to design that way. So we are moving from architecture has moved from something very geometrical to kind of mathematical, because we can define or we can grow architecture and spaces, forms or spaces or structure using the same algorithm, right? So this is something that I'm very interested in. And of course, in school, again, we will experiment, and these are some of the way that the students have kind of coded. For example, the sand on the left, right? The middle is about fish, right? So how fish swim and how the density, how they come together, they form groups, and how they affect the water flow. The one on the right is about sea turtle, right? So one way of thinking about, this algorithm that can generate a spectrum of final form. Uh, we research that, right? So of course, this takes a few more steps to turn into architecture, but it's something that we get to teach in year one for the past 3 years, and it's extremely exciting. Right, so this is another one, studying particles, right? So just thinking about the relations of all these particles, some looser than the other, and then the resultant form, from something, if the connection's tight, then the particles stick together, and then when it's loose, they kind of like explode and scatter more, right? Or studying these particles in terms of Brownian motion. So it's a lot about defining the relations and relations of structures or spaces, rather than, so the form becomes an outcome. The final form is emergent, rather than we envisioning a kind of fixed form and just build that, right? So we write the relations and we can grow a family of form, which then maybe we can go select and go through what are the criteria and select different form. This is another project by the students as well. So growing crystal on the left, and then this is about bouncing, different shapes bouncing, and you form different trajectories. And the right is about collision and clumping together. So all these are different relations. So the first time, before all this, the first time, like I try to do something like that is for competition, because it's quite hard to convince a real client to do it. And this is for the ArchiFest Pavilion competition. We were shortlisted, not chosen in the end. But yeah, so this is the first time they're trying to grow different kinds of grids. And then, so the space is just defined by different density of grids, and they can kind of occupy the space however they want, right? So if they want more intimacy, maybe they will go to the grids that has more columns. So it's the first time that I try to design. So usually pavilion is about designing a sculpture, like how it looks like. But here, basically, there's no form. It's a few of spatial conditions. And hopefully these spatial conditions are also not repeated. There's a wide spectrum of spatial condition that the users can then choose to occupy however they want. This is also for a competition. So usually when we get projects and we need to execute projects, we don't have time. We are given maybe 2-3 weeks to design. So that's so designing usually takes place through competition when we have free time, right? Like once a week, every Friday, right? So when the project, so we'll collect and form a few ideas, and then when the right project comes along, we just apply, right? So there's no time when to wait. Okay, so school kind of teaching clarifies my thought, and then on the side, when there's a right competition or right project comes along, then we will do this. So this is for Founders Memorial Competition, which in the end we didn't submit. This is done together with Small Architects, yeah, with Mayan. So some of you know Mayan. So basically, it's about, again, growing a field of condition, and from spatial condition, um, from growing very small. So this is grids, right? So from very tight, again, very tight spaces to very large spaces. And this grids is then kind of also populated with different porosity. So the two matrix add together, you will get a very complex maze of form. So I don't know whether like museum or things like that is a good program to inhabit these spaces, because sometimes they think it's too complex. But basically it doesn't matter. It can be for any program. But we just wanted to create a variety, a building with a variety of spaces, right? Not just something that caters to the program, right? And similar spaces. So we want to create, because it's more like nature, right? If you go into a forest, then like a natural forest, then you will get very shaded area, and then all the way to very bright areas, right? So basically we're trying to create a forest. And so eventually that idea kind of got adopted to this competition for Children's Aid Society. And it's the first time then we take their programs and brief requirement, and we apply and try to occupy the structure that we have, and also try to satisfy all the regulations in Singapore. This is what we have. And so it's really, because it's a children's village, so, or school, so we thought it would be more fun if it's more like a forest than like something that is repeated, right? That is predictable. Okay. And then in 2021, a client, a crypto exchange client approached us, and basically they bought a piece of land in the metaverse, and they asked us to build an NFT art museum for them. So they are going to display their own NFT art collection. They're going to let their client display their own art collection, right? So if you know the crypto industry and the blockchain industry, is precisely what all this algorithm is, right? It's not centralized, and there's kind of like a self, it's based on the algorithm, it's autonomous. And then also because in metaverse you can, is virtual, so we thought maybe we can use this algorithm. We just write a few algorithms for them, but they can kind of rebuild their NFT museum every month, right? Because the algorithm will give rise to a series of form, right? So every row here, you see here there are 3 algorithms, but every algorithm can give rise to endless form. So they can then generate this museum over and over again. And this idea is tied to the blockchain idea, right? Where it's decentralized, it's not controlled. So we presented, they chose the first algorithm. This is the model. So this is a very simple, So it's very small, and then we just kept it very simple. We didn't even bother to write new relations. But basically, this is a Voronoi relation, and we just based on the size and their artwork, and we have input, we have some limits, and this was the form. Like we test out different materials, and this is actually a fly-through. So the other good thing about metaverse is there's no gravity and there's no problem with navigation. At any one point they want to get out of the museum, they can just teleport themselves. This is what we thought the museum would look like in the metaverse, but as you can see, so when you build this building in the metaverse, they basically will become pixelated, and it depends on how much you pay. So here you have more pixel, so the diagonals and all looks better. This is the higher, this is more pixelation. So basically it's not going to look like a plate like this, but it's made of pixel called 3D pixel, so it's called voxels. So that was fun because it's like a building undergoing construction. We also have to construct this building in metaverse, and it's still related to the technology. So this, for example, this metaverse is not so refined in terms of their graphics. So this is what you get, and eventually, this was built, and this is how you look at the boxes are quite big. So this is how the building looks like in the metaverse, and this is how it looks like when you see from the inside. Yeah, so the boxes are pretty big. And then after that, they bought a second piece of land for their virtual HQ. And then we wrote more algorithms for them. You can take a look. I won't go into details. And then as they were building this, then they thought there's a clampdown in China, and they shifted their HQ to Singapore. So they kind of want us to build their real HQ in Singapore. But this is they got a space in a very typical kind of office building. So you can see it's a rectangle space, and with 6 big columns, right? So we are like, okay, it can't be so different from your virtual HQ. Can we still do something with algorithms, right, to generate the space? But it's pretty much trying to do something within the box, and it has to be highly functional because of it's an office space. So we came up with 6 kind of organizing splines. So we put the splines into the program, and then we kind of occupy each space with their office requirement. Then these spaces will kind of expand and contract to push and shape the splines. So in the end, there was the final form. So this is the final splines that was built. And the spaces are the furniture, they are floating around, and this is the main. They also wanted a kind of wall as a backdrop when the CEO speaks to the news people, the media people. So we have to make a wall that talks about their identity and their practice. I'll go a bit more into the wall later. So this is the eventual office spaces. So this is the wall, and there are actually 3 of them, and it also has to be very simply built. So what we did was we kind of took the pricing of BTC, Bitcoin, ETH, and Doge, and put it inside to generate forms like that. So this is actually a K-line chart for those, for that shows the pricing of these 3 cryptocurrencies, and then is translated into members that goes up and down like that. So this forms the kind of motifs, geometrical motifs for all the additional design feature of the building. This is another photo of the space of all the curves. So these are like some of the art piece that we made out of, this is a colored plywood. So again, it's based on the same algorithm, is the K-line chart or the trading charts. This is the CEO's table, also generated from the splines and some of this. So we tried to use some algorithms to design some parts of the project. So it's the first one in this language that's built. Okay. Anyone has any question, or should I go straight into this, the detailed construction of the space house?
Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so
Move on.
it's okay. Yeah, I think I'll just move on. So basically that sums up the four languages, that how I kind of self-evaluate my projects, or determine the directions that I want each project to go, and also kind of the teaching in school.